When two parties enter a marriage, the law grants that union an immediate presumption of validity. It carries an expectation of permanence, operating as a binding legal contract that stands until a court formally grants a divorce. But certain severe defects prevent a marriage from ever forming at all. Under Section 11 of the Matrimonial Causes Act, 1973, a marriage involving bigamy or prohibited family relations is classified as void. In the eyes of the law, it simply never existed. That absolute legal failure sits in sharp contrast to a voidable marriage. Under Section 12 of the same act, a voidable marriage is fully recognized. It remains legally valid and binding on both parties, right up until the moment a court intervenes to annul it. To annul a voidable marriage, the applicant must prove a latent defect existed at the exact time of formation. You cannot annul a marriage based on bad behavior that happens years later. The legal flaw must be present at the origin of the contract itself. In England and Wales, these proceedings are governed strictly by two statutes: the Matrimonial Causes Act 1973 for marriages and the Civil Partnership Act 2004 for civil partnerships. To successfully navigate a nullity case, we have to map out the specific formation defects under Section 12, clear the strict procedural bars set by Section 13, and properly handle the resulting financial and testamentary fallout. For a legal practitioner, drawing a hard line between a voidable marriage and a divorce is critical. Divorce addresses the breakdown of a valid marriage. Nullity requires you to prove the marriage was legally defective from day one, carrying an entirely different burden of proof. This logic tree maps the framework for voidable marriages, starting with consummation. This applies exclusively to heterosexual marriages. The path splits. First is incapacity. The partner is permanently incapable of consummating. Second is willful refusal, a definite decision not to consummate without just legal excuse. The legal threshold for consummation is precise. A single act of sexual intercourse following the wedding ceremony is sufficient to consummate the marriage. Once that happens, this ground is permanently eliminated, even if it is followed by decades of celibacy. The court also separates the ability to consummate from the ability to conceive. A party being sterile, or a couple relying on artificial insemination to have children, does not factor into the legal definition of consummation. Because non-consummation deals with the historical baseline of marital validity, it holds a uniquely protected status in matrimonial law. Unlike almost every other defect, claims based on consummation are entirely exempt from the standard procedural time limits. The second category evaluates the absence of valid consent. The first node is duress, facing a threat grave enough to completely overbear your will. The second is mistake, which only invalidates consent if it relates to the nature of the ceremony or the person's identity. The law sets a high bar here. Being mistaken about a partner's attributes, their personality, or their financial fortune does not invalidate your consent. The final two nodes evaluate mental capacity. A marriage is voidable if a party was of unsound mind at the ceremony, or suffered from a mental disorder so severe it rendered them unfit to understand and execute the duties of marriage. The court draws a firm boundary. You cannot annul a marriage simply because you made a bad bargain based on undisclosed personality traits. You must prove you were deprived of the agency required to enter into a binding contract. The final category of Section 12 grounds deals with undisclosed physical or status conditions. First, a pre-existing sexually transmitted infection unknown to the applicant. Second, the respondent was pregnant by a third party. Third, a party legally acquired a new gender and kept it hidden. The statute isolates these specific scenarios because they represent fundamental breaches of physical and identity-based trust present at the precise moment the union was formed. Your application must now survive the statutory bars of Section 13, which act as strict procedural filters. The first is delay. For most defects, you must initiate proceedings within 3 years of the date of the marriage, or your claim is barred. As noted, the critical exception to this 3-year rule is consummation. Applications based on incapacity or willful refusal can be brought forward at any time. The second filter evaluates applicant knowledge. An annulment is barred if you knew about the defect when you married. The final filter is conduct or approbation. The order is denied if your actions led your spouse to believe you accepted the marriage. Section 13 exists to protect the institution of marriage. Its purpose is to prevent parties from taking known, historical defects and using them years later for strategic advantage during a separation. When an application proves a formation defect and successfully clears the statutory bars, the court issues a final nullity order. At that moment, the union's legal status changes. Because a voidable marriage remains valid right up until that final order is granted, any children born during the union retain their legal status as legitimate. The effect on testamentary documents is highly specific. While the act of getting married automatically revokes any prior will, receiving a nullity order has a different effect. Once annulled, the law treats your ex-spouse as if they are deceased regarding the execution of any will made during the marriage. Furthermore, the rules of intestacy post-order confirm that if one party dies without a will, the surviving ex-spouse has no automatic right of inheritance. But despite the marriage being annulled, the court retains the exact same wide discretionary powers over property and financial remedies under the Matrimonial Causes Act that it uses in a standard divorce. Mastering the interplay between the formation defects of Section 12 and the procedural hurdles of Section 13 is the only way a practitioner can navigate nullity. It is through this specific process that the court can apply the same equitable financial remedies used in a standard divorce.